So I just wanted to start with a brief introduction on the ArMoR project group. Forgot about this one. So the ArMoR project group is, as it says, a group of projects. So part of them are European funded and others have different sources of funding that all work on a similar topic or objective. And in this case, it has to do with antimicrobial resistance. You can see here on the screen which projects have all been involved in the project group. Actually, only, well, roadmap's finishing. AMUAVANT is not finished yet, but it will finish soon. Okay. And BM Farm and Farm-CARE are also still running, but the other ones are actually already finished. And the ArMoR project group actually is originating from a Horizon Results Booster, so that the Horizon Results Booster is actually finishing too, but that doesn't mean we have to stop there. We have gathered these people. We have gathered stakeholders, and I don't think we should lose that. Again, I've heard it again today, keeping the momentum, so that's what we're also going to try to do with the ArMoR group, even though it will technically be finished. I basically already told that. So we have a Facebook community. This one used to be the Disarm community of practice. We took it over from the Roadmap project and we renamed it to the Animal Health and Antibiotics Network. For the people who are not in it yet, second QR code of the day. So please join us there. And this community, in collaboration and sharing, we will give this one to AMUAVANT again, because this project will outlast us. And then I really hope that AMUAVANT is going to find a successor as well, so we can keep it going. And I think within the ArMoR project group, we should have some discussions, even though projects are finishing, if we can find some momentum to still maybe do some things in this Facebook community to keep the idea alive. And I think it's also something that we've already heard yesterday and also today. So for all the people who hopefully now had time to scan my QR code, I want to give the floor. Go back. I can go back. How much more time? I don't see any more phones. So I would like to give the floor to Luca. I'm going to try to pronounce your last name. Guardabassi?
Guardabassi.
Si. You can hold this, or you can talk in that.
No, I prefer to hold this.
You also have to hold this.
Thank you.
And I will move to the side.
Thank you. And thank you to Roadmap for inviting me, for giving me the opportunity to present these two projects within the ArMoR, how do you call it, alliance, network, whatever. Yes, and it's good also to meet the Roadmap people in person. Something that we share with Roadmap is that all these projects started right before the beginning of the pandemics. So we have been meeting and knowing each other online and via email, and finally by the end of the project, so actually we have the opportunity to know each other. So thank you for inviting me. So I'm a microbiologist, but don't worry, I will not talk about microbiologists because I'm fully aware that I'm the only one in this audience, and I would lose you very quickly if I start talking about bacteriology. But what I want to say is that actually the name of my professorship is One Health AMR, so I've been always working with AMR, and One Health is really a key of my daily work, and I envision more and more collaboration across disciplines, including social sciences. I think it is very important. So these two projects are quite different, but they both have to do with interventions to reduce antimicrobial use in pig farming. And they have one common challenge. And as far as I remember, this morning, someone was asking whether AMR is an animal health problem. And the answer is actually it can be. It is quite increasingly a problem in companion animal veterinary medicine, but there are a few situations where it is also a problem in livestock production. And these two projects actually focus on one disease where AMR is really a problem at the interface between human and animal health. I'll show you in a while. So we decided in both projects to focus on pigs simply because pigs account for the vast majority of antimicrobial use. These are data from Denmark, which is a renowned pig-producing countries. But I think at the European level, and in all European countries where pig are produced, they are also the main reason for antibiotic use. And if you look at this graph here that is showing the kilograms of biomass for animal species, you see that if you put together young and other cattle, they approximate the amount of biomass that is produced by pigs. But if you look at the consumption of antimicrobials, pigs account for 82% of antimicrobial use. So the thought behind focusing on these animal species that we want to impact antibiotic use, and by developing interventions that are effective, then why not trying to do this in pig production? And both diseases, they actually focus on post-weaning diarrhea. For those who are not familiar with the term weaning, this is when the animals are taken away from the sow and they are fed with solid food. It's a very stressful time for the piglets, first of all, because they are separated from the sow, as I said this morning, a long time before the natural time of weaning. But also they are mixed with piglets from other litters, and they start biting each other, fighting, they get stressed. And they also have a stress that is related to the change in the diet. And this is why this is a very critical period where they get diseased. This is the most common disease, but you have also respiratory disease and others that may affect the health of these animals at this age. And this is actually the challenge I was referring to. So this disease is endemic, first of all, is present in all countries. And it has been controlled quite successfully using two types of antimicrobials. Zinc oxide, so a high concentration of zinc in the feed, and colistin. And for different reasons, in the name of One Health, we have banned the use of zinc starting from 2022 because it selects for MRSA, methicillin-resistant staphylococci, in livestock that eventually can be transferred to pig farmers and veterinarians. And we have restricted highly the use of colistin. In Denmark, it's practically impossible to use it because of the yellow card system, because of the emergence of a colistin-mediated, plasmid-mediated colistin resistance that is transferable. And therefore, it's again in the name of human public health that we have restricted these antibiotics. And the challenge here is that because of this, we are left with very few drugs that can be used. One of them is neomycin, which has become in Denmark the first choice for treatment of post-weaning diarrhea that is caused, by the way, by commensal E. coli that produce toxins. So it's like an opportunistic pathogen. And these are data showing the prevalence of neomycin resistance in clinical isolates from pigs. Don't bother about the color. Hemolysis is an indicator of toxin production in the strains, but they are both indicating the pathogenic E. coli from pigs. And it clearly shows that after the reintroduction of neomycin in 2017 in Denmark, they decided to ban the zinc before, and therefore neomycin was reintroduced as a kind of substitute of zinc. We have seen an escalation in the prevalence of resistance, and the last data from 2022 show that approximately 40% of the isolates are resistant. Now, as any passive surveillance data, these are a little bit biased, but obviously there is an animal health challenge there, because you would never prescribe an antibiotic with 40% resistance as a first-line drug in human medicine, right? So moving on about the project, briefly, you can see it's a quite big project, both in terms of funding, more than 6 million, including the self-financing, a number of institutions involved. You have a number of universities, in addition to the University of Copenhagen, industries, SMEs, and of course the FVE that is represented here in this audience. On the top of that, there are also stakeholders that are represented in the external advisory board, and just to mention COPA-COGECA and FIFAC, that are, and of course Animal Health Europe. Animal Health Europe, yes. That is also represented here in the room. It was supposed to end by December 2024, but we got extended the project of 6 months, so we will end in June 2025. And this is not really a research project, so the challenge here is to bring alternatives to antimicrobials closer to the market. And there is this classification system that was not developed for veterinary products, but has been used in this case. And I forgot to say that it is an innovation action project. And innovation action projects are supposed, to support activities directly aiming at producing new or improved products. So we want to take these new or improved products closer to the market. And in practical terms, we have to move the products from TRL 5 to TRL 7, where the operational environment is actually a commercial farm. So by the end of the project, we should be able to demonstrate, or at least to test, the efficacy of these products in a real farm. You're welcome to stop me at any time if you have questions. So what kind of products, what kind of alternatives to antimicrobials we have for reducing antimicrobial use? We have quite a number, and we have structured the project according to the type of alternative. So you see in work package 1, we have the so-called gut microbiome modulators. So we are testing symbiotics, which are a combination of probiotics and prebiotics. And we are testing also a fecal transplantation protocol that is on farm, so it doesn't imply transfer of feces from one farm to another. Then we have the second one, which is targeting the pathogen I mentioned in the previous slide, the enterotoxigenic E. coli, using polymers or phage that are directly specific for this pathogen. A third one that is dedicated to immunostimulant, and we have both oral and injectable products that have been developed and tested. And finally, a fourth work package that is dedicated to feeding strategies. These are the preclinical work packages. The project is big, so it includes also a number of other work packages, for example, one on regulatory affairs, where the work package leaders of the first 4 work packages are interacting, because there are a lot of regulatory issues associated with the development of these new products, as I will show you in a while. But this is where we are now. Basically, we have finished the preclinical phase, and we are entering the clinical trials, where we want to test the best products, the best interventions on commercial farms. And in the last annual meeting, we have selected, so each beneficiary could vote based on the data that were generated in the 4 work packages, what was the most promising intervention. And the 2 interventions that were this kind of internal competition, was fecal microbiota transplantation, which consists in the transplant of feces from a healthy donor to young piglets shortly after birth to prevent post-weaning diarrhea. And fiber-rich diet, that was developed by the group at Scotos Feed Research in the Netherlands. But to make a long story short, the next step should be to to test these two products to check the efficacy in preventing post-weaning diarrhea on real farms in Denmark, the Netherlands, and France. And then in France, there will be an additional clinical trial where the focus will not be the efficacy, but it will be antibiotic use. So for a larger period of time, the use of antibiotics in the farms will be tested, will be monitored, sorry, and by the end, we have modelers that will model what would be the impact on antibiotic use in Europe by 2030 if these interventions were implemented in all EU countries. So it's a quite complex type of work. And briefly about, I don't want to show you, as I said in the beginning, some technical data, but I want to show you that we may have maybe a little bit, we may be a little bit too optimistic about the role that alternatives to antimicrobials may have in the reduction of antimicrobial use. So this is the kind of fecal transplant that was used, of 3 different types: gastric, fecal, and filtrate of the fecal transplant. And of course, there was also a control group that was treated with saline. The piglets were treated shortly after birth, and then there was the time to weaning. Weaning in Denmark is about 21 days, 3 weeks. And after that, around day 24, the piglets were inoculated with this pathogen that I mentioned before, enterotoxigenic E. coli. And then they were monitored for the occurrence of diarrhea and the consistency of their feces and many other tests that I'm not going to mention here. But the results show it that, you remember that day 24, the piglets are inoculated, and you see that the control group is actually not doing worse than the other. There was no statistically significant difference, meaning that the interventions were not able to prevent the occurrence of diarrhea, which, however, developed in different ways in the groups. And you can see the red one, which is the fecal transplant filtrate. So not real feces, but a filtrate of the feces was the one performing better. And by day 28 and 29, there was a significant lower occurrence of post-weaning diarrhea in the piglets treated with this filtrate. And you can see also, when you look at the graphic that is indicating the consistency of the feces, how solid the feces are, you can see the pinkish line that is doing better. I mean, having more solid feces means that the piglets had less diarrhea compared to the other treatments and the control. And I promise this is the last slide about technical data. So now I will talk to you about something that I think is very interesting, the challenges as a coordinator in managing a project like this. For example, there is an EU legislation that says that pigs cannot be fed with feces. And this is a major obstacle in the implementation of fecal transplantation in piglets, because it is fecal material. Even if it is a filtrate, it is considered as a fecal material. So it is neither a feed additive nor a medicinal product. So both EFSA and EMA are not taking any responsibility with this. So there is clearly a regulatory gap. We are talking a lot about multi-approach, multi-sectorial projects. And we have actually this agency on board in the project, but we are stuck in a situation where we cannot actually test a product that is quite promising in reducing the use of antibiotics because of the current legislation. So, and some countries, including Denmark, have denied the authorization for performing this study in the field. Unless we slaughter all the pigs, but of course this is not sustainable for the project because we don't have so much money to reimburse the farmers for all the pigs present in the farm. Then there are some technical challenges that could be solved. I mean, these are really a minor point. We should have a test for detecting the donors, the healthy donors within the farm, handling the individual pigs, because it's the inoculation is intragastrical, so it's not so easy, but it is doable. And now briefly about the other project that is part of this ArMoR consortium, the Farm-CARE. This is a much smaller project, and it's still a European project, but it includes a low middle income country, that is Colombia. Por Colombia, which is the producer that accounts for about 70% of the pig farms in Colombia, is one of the partners. And it is financed for Colombia by ICARS, if you are familiar with the organization. All the other organizations are from Europe, are veterinary organizations and also human medicine, public health laboratories and hospitals. So it's again a One Health project, but on a much smaller scale. And what I have to say about this is that there is one intervention that is based on stopping mixing of the piglets at weaning, meaning that we try to keep the piglets together. And also when a piglet gets sick, it goes into a hospital pen. So it's very important also not to treat the piglets that are not diseased. And then we see what is the impact of this intervention on AMR in the pigs, but also in the slurry that is coming out from the farm. And then there is a second intervention that we test by a separate work package that is more focusing on the transmission between the pigs and the farmers. So at the end, if we can, if the pigs still have AMR genes, but we can reduce the transfer to the farmers, that is also an important achievement. And this is again very simple measures based on cloth hygiene and also hand hygiene that can be relatively easily implemented within an intensive pig farm. And then, interestingly, there was a discussion this morning that we lack cost-benefit analysis data on interventions in pig production. Hopefully, this project will be able to generate data for these two interventions, because we have an economist involved who is going to take care of that. So we will try to measure what are the benefits from not only from the farmer perspective, but also from the societal perspective. And she will do this by business case and cost effectiveness analysis. And then we have something that is interesting from my perspective as a researcher, the use of machine learning tools to identify probiotic and prognostic markers. I don't want to say again much about that, but what you have to know about this disease is that even piglets coming from the same sow and growing in the same pen may respond differently to the pathogen. Some remain healthy and some get disease. And obviously here it's not a genetic factor, it's not an environmental factor, because they come from the same sow and they live in the same environment. So we are going to investigate a number of different elements, including the composition of the microbiota of these animals, together with behavioral data. There is the group in Bristol that is looking at the facial expression of the piglets, which is indicative of the stress, the level of stress in the animal. The classical performance data on weight gain, the metagenomic data, as I said before, health data, whatever the animals get disease, this is recorded, and of course data on antibiotic usage and many other things like vaccination status and so on. And then we want to use the machine learning big data analysis approach to see if we can identify prognostic markers that can predict which animals will become diseased during this longitudinal study. And also some probiotic candidates that we could eventually try to isolate from the samples retrospectively to develop new probiotics. So in a sense, this study is focusing on two types of interventions that are quite simple, as I said before, stopping transmission between farmers and the animals, and of course also between farmers and their families. So as part of the study, we will monitor the effect of the interventions also in the family household that is involved. And the second one that I mentioned, again, the stop mixing the piglets from different litters, but also piglets with different level of risk. For example, there are piglets with very low weight and piglets that are healthy and with good weight. We want to separate them and avoid that they are treated with antibiotics when it's not necessary. So what I'm going to show now is a brief version of a video that was that is based on a survey, a questionnaire survey carried out in Avant, where we compare the perception by veterinarians, farmers, and consumers about all the interventions that I mentioned so far. So the ones of Avant that are a little bit more technologically advanced, maybe less understood by these categories, and the very simple ones that we are using in farm care. And it's like a kind of summary of the main outcomes of the result. If you can, am I supposed to start the video? Let's see if I'm able to.
Participants agree that antibiotic resistance is a public health problem and that we need to reduce antibiotics in animals. They are aware of the negative impact on human health. Most of the participants would pay 10% more for meat produced with less antibiotics. To reduce antibiotic resistance, preferred measures are vaccines, biosecurity, or farm management procedures and feed additives. In comparison to existing biosecurity procedures, feeding strategies and probiotics are the most accepted Avant solutions, followed by immunostimulants. The rest of the solutions were seen as neutral. Looking a bit into details, for example, vets and farmers consider feeding strategies easy to implement, safe, and effective to treat diarrhea in pigs. They also have a similar opinion about probiotics. Consumers would buy meat from animals treated with Avant solutions. They also agree that use of those solutions would improve the image of animal farming in their country. The survey shows it is necessary to reduce the use of antibiotics in animal production to prevent antibiotic resistance. Acceptance of alternative solutions like those in Avant is high. There is a clear market potential for these alternative solutions.
Let me check again. Is there any question at this stage about the video or about what I've said so far? Yes, please. Is there a microphone, extra microphone?
Yeah. Okay.
Oh, we have a second one.
All right. Thanks, Luca, for your presentation. Maybe we, like a comment, we should more communicate between countries, because we did like a previous study on robustness of piglets and same with microbiota and stuff. So it would be interesting to see your results. I have two comments when you talk about colistin.
Which country are you from?
France. So colistin, of course, with this publication of Chinese people, like with the discovery of MSC1 gene, we say that, yeah, there is plasmidic transmission, but for example, the French Agency for Food, Environmental and Occupational Health and Safety in France, they showed that there was not an increase of resistance, even if it has been used for years, for decades, for piglets, for example, in the feed. And concerning the use in human, as you say, yeah, you can use it with nosocomial infection for really multi-resistant bacteria. But we know as well it's really toxic, renal toxicity of colistin, so it's really extreme case, or for example, people suffer from cystic fibrosis. And as you mentioned, in France, we replaced colistin by neomycin or apramycin, and we saw a really high development of resistance. So we maybe asked a question about the colistin problem, and maybe you should have asked to the people from EU as well. So that's why I was just putting the concept of colistin. And as you say, fecal transplantation, there is a big lack with the regulatory constraint, and we've got the same with neonatal diarrhea. We know that it works really well, but we are forbidden to use it, so maybe...
Some farms do it on a regular basis.
Yeah, in France, not fecal transplantation, but we feed the more often the gills, even the sows, with neonatal diarrhea from piglets, especially when it's enterococci or like a Clostridium perfringens type A or difficile, and it works really well. Maybe because we didn't have like the epidemic disease for coronavirus, like we learned as well that it was working. So it's one point. So do you think that due to this regulatory constraint, fecal transplantation can be like a solution? It would be okay in the future? You could like maybe change the law about it? So it's my first question. And the second one, on farmers and their family to see how it has been transmitted and which microbes.
Yes, it's a complex question. I haven't finished the lecture, but it's okay. I think you had a good point about colistin. There is actually no evidence that there is a transfer, or at least that the problems we see in human hospitals are due to the use of colistin in animals. It's not the same gene involved and not the same bacteria involved. About the fecal transplantation, yes, I think it's a very promising tool. Maybe not exactly, we need to define what is the best donor. We didn't spend a lot of resources in investigating what is the best donor of the fecal material. We just got some healthy piglets and screened for the presence of pathogens. We need also to understand why the fecal filtrate actually performs better than the... But first we need also a regulatory framework that allow us to test and develop these interventions in the commercial farms. That was the first or the second question. What was the other one? Sorry, I don't remember.
Like, what should we check on farmers and their family?
Yeah. So we will use basically a metagenomic approach quantifying all the resistant genes in the feces of the family members, the farmers and the pigs. And then we will analyze statistically what are the overlaps in terms of not only quality, but type of gene, but also quantity of for each gene. There was another question from there. Yes.
Hi, thanks for that. I'm Gareth Henticott from Cardiff University in Wales. I was just wondering if you could talk a bit about the methodology for this survey, because I'm sitting here looking at some of these questions and even I don't know what these things are. So I'm just wondering how any member of the public can make an informed kind of decision on those things.
Yes. Well, first of all, this was subcontracted, so the survey was performed by a company that is specialized in this sector. So they had already, it was based on phone interviews, and they had already large numbers of veterinarians, farmers, and consumers already in their database. 4 countries were involved, Denmark, Spain, Germany, and Poland, as far as I remember. And don't ask me too much about the details. It's a huge document and a huge data set that was generated by the survey, but we are working on a manuscript that will be submitted and will undergo normal, regular peer review processes. So I guess you will know more about, unless you have a specific question on, I told you which countries were involved. There were many questions. It was divided, the questionnaire was divided into 4 sections. And this is just a very short summary of the many results that we got, and also presented in a way that is understandable by a broad audience. So I fully understand your not skepticism, but your question. Okay, if I have just a couple of slides more, I think if you read across the numbers that were provided by the video, there are other results that are quite interesting. And one of them is that the consumers want to reduce AMU, and that more than 70% of them believe that actually the use of antibiotics in animals have an impact on animal health. So this means that this mantra, let's raise awareness, let's wiser, we actually succeeded in raising awareness. Yes, please.
I'm sorry, I have a question about this. Did you check if they thought it was important to...
Yeah, I was like, you were going there? Shit, microphone.
Yeah, but then I
I'm
have to
sorry.
take it back. It's a little complicated.
Do they think it's important because of antimicrobial residues in meat, or because in our project in Roadmap there was like often a misconception amongst consumers that they were very concerned about residues in meat, which are often not present because it's very strictly controlled, and not necessarily about resistance and public health.
Well, are you asking me as a scientist if I'm concerned about the
No, I'm asking if you check that in the survey, or if you know that, or.
No, actually, we didn't check as far as I remember, but I don't think it may be that it contributes to the awareness, but I think it's the story that by using antibiotics we select resistant bacteria that can be transferred to humans. It is now quite broadly accepted in the community, in the society. But it may well be that there are also some misconceptions, some misbeliefs that contribute to this awareness. Even though, from a scientific standpoint, I have to say that there is more and more evidence that is showing that this transmission is actually very limited, and that what we see in the problem that we see in general practice and human hospitals is mainly mainly due to the use of antibiotics in human medicine. So this is why I asked also the question this morning, what is the political goal of this strategy of reducing antibiotic use? Because we are not seeing actually an effect in the frequency of antimicrobial resistant infections in humans. So we have decreased a lot, but nothing has changed in the other sectors. So this is also kind of evidence that we are not contributing much to the problem. And as I said, if we want to have antibiotic-free production, then we need to follow what you said, that we need to change completely our production system. We cannot pretend that our piglets are produced so effectively and livestock in general with low price and no use of antibiotics. It's a mix that is not compatible. We say in Italy, you cannot have your wife drunk and the bottle full, something like that. Anyway, it's very effective, isn't it? Yes. Then another important point is about 70% of the consumers are willing to pay 10% of more for meat, food products that are not produced, that do not originate from pigs where antibiotics are used. And this goes back to another point that was discussed this morning, or at least I threw the stone. It was not really, there was not a response by the stakeholders, but I think we can convince the consumers that it is worth it to spend a little bit more for what we eat. We are what we eat. It's very important what we put in our body. And again, finding the price of a chick comparable to the price of a bottle of Coke is not right, in my opinion. I think there is a question from...
Yes, there are two ways to detect the willingness to pay of consumers. One is to ask, how much would you like to pay? But the other one is to go to the supermarket and check the prices and to say how much they pay for an improved good, like organic or without antibiotic, and compare to the price of the conventional. And so you can see how much they are willing to pay and how much they buy of those products.
Yeah, and there are some data.
And, no, I add one thing, that there are also often, when you ask, you have results, but when you detect the price, you have other results, very different.
And there are data that are showing that most consumers will go for the cheaper product. But we have also other strategies that are, you can take decisions. I'm usually very much in favor of bottom-up approaches, but there are also top-down approaches, and that work very well. I mean, look at the AMU. It was a top-down approach, and it was very effective. So I wonder what will happen if you remove the cheap option from the supermarket. If people would continue to eat as much meat as they do now, maybe we would even improve our diet by eating less meat. So this is I think we need a cultural change there.
Don't you think that maybe people have the right to choose what they prefer to do? So there are also freedom, things like that.
Yeah,
economic freedom.
But we cannot go on if in 10 years we meet again here and we are still talking about reducing antimicrobial use, that we should do something about animal welfare. At some point we need to take strategical decisions to target, to reach a goal.
Yes,
and,
of course.
Yes.
With top-down approach, you can do whatever you want. So the Soviet Union, for example, they...
No, it's a little bit different, because here we are talking about the health of our animals and the health of the society. So I think in the name of health, you can actually, in the name of One Health, you can actually make a policy that is acceptable by most. I remember at the time the growth promoters were stopped in the 90s, the farmers were terrified by the idea of not using growth promoters. And you see how much the situation has changed over the last 20 years. Anyway, it's a controversial issue. I can see pros and cons, but I would be in favor of a top-down process in this case. And then something that I don't know if you noticed, but all the categories were ranking very high, the simple biosecurity measures or farm management interventions like the ones we are testing in Farm-CARE. But they were a little bit more skeptical about phage therapy and fecal transplantation. It is something new. So we need also not only to fill the regulatory gaps, but also you people involved in social sciences, we need to inform the end users that these products overall are useful in reducing antibiotic use and do not have consequences on the health of the animals and the consumers. Yeah, this is actually what I wanted to say. They were more skeptical towards these innovative solutions. And now, really at the end, maybe I can stimulate some few more questions by these points. So one thing I strongly believe is that, yes, we can improve these technical measures to alternatives to antimicrobials as much as we want. But if we don't change the animal health and welfare conditions in livestock production, we are not going to lower this necessary amount of antibiotics that was mentioned today by our stakeholders. Because this is due to the stress of the animals, and if we don't remove the stress, it will be there despite of how many alternatives we develop. That it is important to fill these regulatory gaps. We have sent a letter to the European Commission. It's really a pity that the Animal Health Unit is not present here today. That was my hope, but unfortunately they are not here. And then this is a little bit, if I pull together all what I've said so far, also this morning, if you really want to reduce or eliminate the use of antibiotics in livestock production without affecting animal health and welfare, we need to have a holistic approach that requires some political decisions and also acceptance by the consumers, the public, and also the end users, veterinarians and farmers, in favor of making this big change. It's a cultural change that we need. It's not we will not make the change by small technical advances. This is if we want to eliminate the use of antibiotics from livestock production, we need a cultural change. Thank you very much, and of course, if you have more questions, I'm here.
Thanks for your presentation. I have a question. You had, in the AMUAVANT project, you have 4 alternatives?
For groups,
yes.
So
4 groups.
Actually 7.
And you will only test 2 groups out of the 4 on farms. And I was wondering why the other 2, being then the phage therapy and the immunostimulants, why did they not make the cut?
Because for a number of issues, you mentioned phage and?
Immunostimulants, I think it was?
Yes. So immunostimulants is a long story, but the company involved in this project went actually bankrupt. So they have a product that is already in the market for cattle use. So it would have been relatively easy to develop a similar products for, but I think this element, so when you coordinate a project like this in the middle of the pandemic with some partners that are going bankrupt, you have also to deal with a situation like this. It's also a very unspecific measure because you stimulate the immune response, which is not necessarily what you need for these very young piglets. Anyway, the data that they provided at the end were not as strong as for the two that were selected. It was a democratic vote. Each beneficiary could give 3 votes, 3 priorities, and the phage is really complex. We have a regulatory gap there as well. At least we know which agency is the reference agency, is EMA in Europe, and they have developed a framework for human use of phage, but we are in a situation where phage therapy is not even implemented in human hospitals, so it's a little bit going into a farm, releasing some living microorganisms that are viruses at the end, even though they are innocuous, they do not affect the animal and human health cells. Is a little bit, I can see the complication there clearly, but with fecal transplantation with a little bit of flexibility, I think we can easily move into implementation on commercial farms.
Thank you, Luca, for the presentation on the 2 really interesting projects. In respect to Avant, so 2 solutions are now selected, and you talked a little bit about the fecal transplantation. Could you also give a little bit of additional information on the second one that was selected, the high fiber diet, because that seems like a really easy one if it would work. Yeah. And I know in rabbits, for example, they managed to reduce also diarrhea around weaning with feed restriction quite a lot. So just interested in that one.
Yeah, it's, I'm not a dietologist, and, but it's about the quantity of fiber in the feed, but also the quality. It has something to do with alfalfa, but it is relatively easy, but it's also difficult to implement that one. Because I've just been told that if you change the feeding system, I mean, not all farms have the same feeding system. And changing the feeding system and implementing this strategy, for example, would imply the construction of silos within the farm. So this has a cost. So I'm having problem as a coordinator, even with the simplest interventions, which is changing the diet of the piglets. There are still resistances by the farmers. And of course, the resources that maybe we were a little bit optimistic in when we made the proposal, we didn't think about these obstacles when making the budget of the project. I have to say that even I'm really a stubborn person, so even if we fail completely with the trials, I want to be sure that at least there will be an output in this project that will make life easier for researchers that are going to make projects on fecal transplantation and diet strategies in the future. So at least I would like from the authorities something black on white on what are the requirements for changing, for testing these interventions in the field. And also maybe provide some figures on what are the obstacles and what are the economical resources that are needed for designing a farm trial to test these interventions. So at least I want to facilitate the future research in this field, even if we fail completely, I hope not, with our interventions. Elena?
I have 2 here, and then I'll go there. And there.
Orla Shortall from the James Hutton Institute. I appreciated your presentation and your perspective. I had a question about the last point there. So I was wondering, is that perspective that we can't continue producing in the same way without antibiotics, is that a philosophical or an evidence-based position? And I'm a social scientist with a philosophy background, so I don't think philosophical is a bad word or ideological is a bad word. But I think in when people put forward these views, it's very difficult to tease apart what's philosophical and what's evidence-based, and usually they're kind of intertwined. So yeah, answer that however you want. And my other question was, given that you think that technological interventions won't replace antibiotics within the current system, did you think about trialing other interventions like welfare or things that reduce stress?
Yes. So I'm not an expert in philosophy either, and I'm a quite pragmatic person in my life, both professionally and personally. So no, it's not a philosophical statement. I could actually pose the same question to you if you tell me that you want to have an antibiotic-free production without changing the system. Is it philosophy or reality? So I'm just thinking that, in fact, it was a secondary comment after the question of what is the political target goal. If it is reaching the level of consumption of antibiotics in Denmark, maybe we don't need to rethink the entire system. If we want to have an antibiotic-free production only in this society, which I think is fair, I mean, some people is there anyone here who would like an antibiotic-free production only in Europe? No? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. You see, people are shy, but I think we can easily get, I would be one of them. Then you need a more drastic change, which imply a cultural change. I mean, now we have been talking about that a little bit. I don't mean that we should see pigs on the field. No, still an intensive production, but where the number of piglets per sow is lower, where the weaning, this is a little bit controversial, the weaning period is a little bit longer, and so on, where animal health and welfare are a foundation of the production system. And this is why I would expect the new legislation on animal welfare to come out with some important changes. Because if it doesn't, I see a clear clash between the EU policy on antibiotic use and the EU policy on antibiotic welfare. It's a pity that I asked the question by the end, just before the lunch break. But so I'm not so naive to think that pigs should be outdoor, and but we can have also a dedicated organic outdoor production, pig production, but it cannot cover the demand of proteins in this society. But we can certainly change. Of course, this would increase the cost of the products in the supermarket. So, and this has been mentioned several times. How do we convince consumers? I have said one option is actually to go top down and eliminate the cheap product from the market. But if we really want to have an antibiotic-free production, if we want to accomplish what has already been accomplished in Denmark and in the Netherlands, we can do it without making changes. The other question was about whether the alternatives I'm working with can actually help. This is not enough, I'm afraid. It can help to make small reductions, prevent, because these are normally diseases where vaccine cannot be developed. They are E. coli strains. It's very complicated. I haven't seen any effective E. coli vaccine in the market. But maybe, David, if you have a different opinion, but these commensal organisms are really difficult to prevent by vaccination. So they could help, maybe, probiotics, changes in the diet. They could reduce the incidence of post-weaning diarrhea in this case, but eliminate it completely requires elimination of stress that requires changes, structural changes in the production system.
Like to make a comment and go back a little bit to the controversy that was a while ago. So I think that the food producing systems that we have nowadays, the externalities that they produced are poorly captured. Even though being in favor of economic freedom and choices, I do think that if we are to measure the externalities that these food producing systems cause, you probably end up being more expensive, the food products that they end up producing. So that's one comment. And a question for the projects. Is it going to be
Is it a problem if they become more expensive?
Sorry?
Is it a problem?
No, I don't see it as a problem. I think that they should be more expensive because the externalities that they cause to the societal externalities that they cause should make them more expensive.
Yes.
Okay. Is it going to be a pre and post evaluation, or do you have control farms alongside the intervention farms for the farm-care project?
We have control groups within the same farm. So so we need also farms that are structured in a way that 50% or roughly half of the pigs will be treated normally as if the intervention was not available. Thank you.
I would like to follow up on João's comment, actually. So Elena from Ilvo.
I know you.
Yeah, so I was quite interested in the interventions that you're planning there on farm care. So can you develop a little bit more on what is exactly going to be the contrast that you're going to be using?
Yes.
How are you going to measure the transmission in the in all the hosts that you're going to be looking at?
Yeah.
And also, if there is an idea of perhaps later on also doing an intervention using some of the alternatives. So using an alternative and then doing an intervention afterwards. So building up on the 2 blocks that you're using in farm care.
Yes, I don't understand the last bit that you said, because we are doing an intervention.
Yeah, but the interventions are going to be done before or after the antimicrobials the alternatives are used?
No, there is no, in farm care there is no alternative. So sorry, maybe it has been confusing because I presented 2 different projects. In Avant we develop and test the alternatives, but in farm care we test the effect of the intervention.
So the question would be, would you be interested later on in getting the alternatives and then doing an intervention?
Sure, but we don't have, it's not part of this project. We require another project, another budget. So everything is interesting. To look also at the synergy of the...
Yes,
in fact,
exactly.
one of the things in this trial, I forgot to mention that we would like to test the synergy between fecal transplantation and diet. So if in some countries we will be allowed to perform both, there will be also a group where the 2 interventions, alternatives, are tested together. And going back to the previous question, which I now do
on
not...
the farm interventions and how you're going to basically compare the groups.
So it's a little bit complex, but first of all, it's going to be performed in 2 countries, Ireland and Colombia. And the 2 interventions, they are separate interventions. They will not be performed on the same farms. So the one on humans, it's about cleaning of the clothing, booth baths, hand hygiene, a set of very simple hygienic, personal and clothing hygienic measures that will be implemented in the farm. There was actually a before-after structure, but then it has been decided to do a comparative, cross-sectional approach. And regarding the outputs, the endpoints that will be measured in these farms, I think I mentioned that before, that we will use a metagenomic approach to sequence all the genes present in the feces. I know that it is a little bit simplistic, but it's also a way to standardize the measurement. But on the top of that, we will look also at specific indicators like ESBL producing E. coli, so that we will have some culture-based work to monitor the occurrence and the quantity of some indicator bacteria in the pigs, in the farmers, and in the family members in a longitudinal way. So it won't be only one sampling point. And regarding the other study where we stopped the mixing of the piglets, is again very complex. We will have a hospital pen also. So it's not only about the mixing of the piglets, but not all the piglets that are in the same pen. Because when we use using medicated water, I don't know, I'm talking quite close to the microphone. I don't know what's wrong. Higher? Do I have to eat the microphone? Anyway. Yes, maybe we can continue the conversation over a coffee, over the next coffee break, or I can share the project description with you because that's much easier. And by the way, resources are limited in this project, so if anyone wants to collaborate, especially the dry scientists that do not require laboratory consumables, you are welcome to help us in making a fruitful project out of this.
Yes, thanks a lot. Just an easier question, like it was about the filtrate transplantation, the control were like no treatment. Do you have like an antimicrobial control as well?
Yeah, so the control group, whenever, they are designing the trial now, so they're in work package 5, this is the next milestone. But for sure, in the control group, when the animals get diseased, they will be treated normally with antibiotic like routine management. I'm not sure when they get diseased in the intervention group, how they, I'm still not able to handle the microphone. I cannot be an artist, a showman. So I don't know about that, but it will have to be defined. If we eliminate the animals from the trial, or if we treat them with antibiotics as well. That would, of course, complicate the measurements of the effect if we do so.
And so we could discuss about this because for me, phages are not an innovative solution, like it has been searching for a long time about the efficiency of phages, and as you say, like about the impact on, because it's alive and it's a live thing. But yeah, I'm part of the skeptic one, and I wanted to know what, as a microbiologist, do you think of phages?
Well, there are countries in Eastern Europe where phages have been used successfully for treating human infections in hospitals. I think there is one product under study for removing bacterial contamination from food products. It may well be that some products will come out and solve a specific problem. They are also very bacterial specific, so they have a very narrow spectrum. So it may well be that they may solve a little problem, but globally, I think they won't be there are no silver bullets, and definitely phage will not be the silver bullet, I think.
Okay, thank you. I'm Paolo Trisi from the University of Bologna. Thank you for the presentation. I know the project are really important. Maybe in some point, we are a little bit not fully agree. For example, the transition on the production all in antibiotic free is something that to discuss is wonderful, but we need to remember that in EU we are very strong for food safety and security, and the antibiotics are part of the food safety and food security system. So pay attention when we claim to avoid the use of antibiotic completely. The second point is the food accessibility for the people. That is, I agree that maybe we can use the price as a way to reduce the protein consumption, but it's also true that in each country there is a range of accessibility to the food, and in some way the protein of animal origin are an important part of the diet. So there's part of population that overeat the protein, I agree, but there is a part that is cannot have access at protein of animal origin of good quality. And just my point on the topic.
Yeah,
the last point.
If you want me to reply, I have to take one by one, because if you make a long list, then when you are at the end, I don't remember the first one.
Yeah, we still have a session with a discussion after this, because we have to start again in 15 minutes. Yes. Okay. We already did 15 minutes.
Yeah, we deserve a coffee break, isn't it?
Still wanna, Jan has been waiting for the microphone for a while. If you can keep it very short, he can have it. But
there are also virus.
But it's unfair that he doesn't get an answer. But if Jan,
discuss it later, right?
Sure.
Very short.
Thank you for having the microphone now, and I have a long list of questions and remarks, but I will keep it short. I would like to come back on this last point about if it is a philosophical thing or if there is evidence that the system should be changed. I think we have to realize that the current system is developed thanks to the availability and accessibility of antibiotics. If they weren't there, the system would not be as it is now. So if we want to reduce the use of antimicrobials, we have to change the system anyway. And what is really important to do, I don't...
You are among those that would like antibiotic-free production, right?
Well,
I saw your hand.
My next point. I think it's not so much a problem if you use antibiotics in an exceptional way, but the problem is that in some systems, every round after round after round, people use antimicrobials. We cannot accept that. That the systemic recurrent use of antimicrobials in...
I'm glad to see you have the same problem with the microphone.
We have to ban the products from the market not because of the price, but because of the quality. If the quality is not good, that is the reason to ban them from the market. And everyone thinks the products may be more expensive, but over the last decades, the use of the... Sorry. Yeah. Okay, thank you. If we look at the percentage of the household budget that goes to food has only decreased, so there is room for increasing it a bit. So I think it wouldn't be a problem if that would go up a little bit. And speaking about social equality, I understand the point, but I don't think that giving in on animal welfare and safety of food is the way to regulate that. There are other mechanisms to do that. And I would like to stop here.
Thank you.
Yeah, and fundamentally I agree on all what you said, so I don't even have to reply. I think you actually indirectly replied to some of the points that Paolo made, but I can continue the conversation with Paolo over the coffee break.
Thank you so much.